Okay, we are recording. Mike, how are you today?
I'm pretty good. Yeah, no complaints.
Wonderful, wonderful. Where are you today?
I'm at my recording studio in Wales, in Borth, Wales, the
Oh,
desolate seaside town of Wales. Yeah,
lovely,
this
lovely.
is the studio where the band actually just recorded their first ever studio album.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, we'll talk lots about new music as this podcast unfolds, but I want to kick off your playlist first of all, and I'll do that by asking you to tell me the song that you regard as having the greatest ever intro, please.
Okay, it's Every Conversation by the June Brides. And in my memory, I think I first heard it maybe on Tony Michaelides' show up in Manchester. I think he had a show called Tony the Greek. And as a young fella, I used to listen to his show, and I feel like this is where I first heard this song. It was the first sort of like, really sort of, sellotape together indie song with this great catchy, you know, horn intro thing. And it was like, oh my gosh. And it was before I was in a band. I was like, wow, what is this? This is great. Not quite in tune, but better for it. It's a great song.
Tell
I
me,
love
before we sort of break down the intro, and I'm always interested to know about how artists also approach songwriting and intros. Um, but first of all, you just touched on radio there. Tell me about how important radio was for you in those sort of formative years.
huge, because I've always been like a slow learner, late bloomer, all that stuff. I was I didn't have cool records as a kid. I led a sheltered suburban life. I didn't start hearing music that really spoke to my soul until my early 20s. And it was radio shows, independent radio shows. I think I can't even remember what station Tony the Greek was, but I feel like it was like Manchester Radio or maybe Piccadilly, one of those regional radio shows where the DJs just played I mean, it really was their choices, their
Mm.
music that spoke to them. And and they would just, you'd listen through a whole show. Maybe there would be two songs in the whole hour show that you actually liked, but you would just hang on for these moments of inspiration when the DJ
Yeah,
would just play something. You're like, whoa, what is that? That's so good.
yeah,
And for me, it was just, yeah, just opening doors
yeah.
into possibilities of music because I just grew up with, just, you know, what would you call it? Just commercial pop, just industry music. And when I first started hearing music, it was more just, just simple and not all bolted down and raw and just a song. Uh, it was so inspiring to me. Because I
Fantastic.
wasn't a talented musician. I wasn't any kind of, I just loved music. And then suddenly hearing these independent music from these handful of DJs that would play this stuff really just opened up a world of possibilities for me and inspired me to write songs, made me feel like, oh, maybe I could do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, so different than listening to, beautiful music, but really made by professionals and stuff. And you're like, well, there's no way into this. This is great, but it's like seamless, you know. So
You know,
the radio was really important to me. It's where I heard everything. There was nothing else.
the
And then
way
I
that
started going to see bands live, but that was late, that came after.
you would approach songwriting in the sort of formative years of the band. Um, how has that changed, if at all, in how you've been approaching the intros and songwriting to this record? Because we live in a very fast-paced world now where people's attention spans seem to be dwindling and everything seems to be very quick and fast. I wonder if any of that has filtered through into your
I think
creative
the
process.
thing with the form of a pop song in particular, it's a generic meaningless term, but you know what I mean, is that it's always been a really succinct form. In fact, if anything, song forms are longer than they used to be. So my earliest heroes were writers in the 50s. And, they would write songs that were a minute 50. And the minute 50 song had an intro, two verses, a bridge, a modulation, and a solo, all in a minute 50,
Yeah.
And some of them even told a narrative story with a beginning, middle, and end. So it's always been an extraordinarily compressed form. And actually, in terms of the development of music, the forms have not got shorter in in the pop. If anything,
Mm.
they've got more fat on them. When I listen to, I think there's some really great songwriting, but of course there is. But I'm my youngest daughter. When I listen to the songs, she teaches herself at the piano. I'm always impressed by the writing. It's really, but it's actually quite verbose and dense. And it's actually quite a lot of words
Yeah.
and quite involved stuff. So it oddly in contradiction to the idea that everybody's sort of become sort of shorter attention span. When I listen to a lot of contemporary songwriting, I'm actually impressed by the volume of words and narratives. It's quite a lot more, you know, than Buddy Holly.
Fantastic.
So,
Fantastic.
um, but yeah, I mean, this is a classic, the intro thing, the thing where you start with a strong thematically melody out the gate that immediately is like, here it is. This is uh, one of the key identifiers of what this song is about, even before the single word has been sung. That's a powerful thing. That's the intro thing. This is like a signature melodic thing, device you could call it, that happens out the gate, and immediately you're engaged, even before the singers, and that theme recurs, et cetera, et cetera. But you
Sure.
establish it in the very first seconds. It's a beautiful thing, and every conversation is one of those right out of the gate. Very simple, lovely melody, and great song that follows it. But the first thing you hear is just this lovely, you know, forthright
Yeah.
horn thing, which is delightful. And actually, I think a big influence on the Man from Delmonte, really, and even on our latest record, is full of these like little signature horn things, melodic things.
Yeah.
I've got to give a nod to the June Brides. I think they were a big inspiration. This one
Superb.
song.
I'm going to ask you now, please, Mike, to tell me the first song you remember hearing that had an emotional impact on you, please.
So that would go further back. That would be, when I was very much younger and listening to my siblings, my brothers and sisters' records, which was a patchy collection of, Jimi Hendrix, Osibissa, and Captain and Tennille. And stuff. It's just weird sort of, oh, the Carpenters. I actually love the Carpenters, but um, I seem to remember borrowing that Joan Armatrading's first album. And of course, the big hit from that was Love and Affection. And actually went back and forth because this is also another contender for the best intro of any
Yeah.
song for me, which is the opening lines of it, which is what I am not in love.
Yeah.
Into persuasion. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
There
that's
is,
pretty beautiful, that.
yeah, I've been writing songs since I was 13 years old, but since before I could really play. And I'm 61 now and I'm still writing songs. And I'm quite happy that I will go to the grave and never write two lines as beautiful as that.
Yeah.
What a strong
Yeah.
and romantic line. I mean, Joan Armatrading is great that way. She walks the line of being like, it's so emotional, this song. It hits everybody that way, despite, I know it's very like, it's got the big, some might call it cheesy saxophone solo in the middle, et cetera, et cetera. It's got all the arrangement stuff that anchor it in a time. But at the end of the day, what a beautiful, moving song. And Joan Armatrading has that way of expressing all this love, but always with this strength of character. And like, don't think that she's never the victim, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Even
Absolutely.
you know what I mean? Love is one of those things where we can always express it as if we're a victim, like as if we're sort of attacked by love. But Joan Armatrading has this way of writing love songs where
Yeah.
she just always seems like, don't think that I'm not going to be that I'm a victim in this. No way. No, no way. Love and Affection is a beautiful one of those, you know. God, I don't know how old she was when she wrote that. My God, what a
Mike,
writer.
if you had to pinpoint the actual emotion that struck within you, how would you describe that emotion? What would it
Well,
be?
what is that thing? So I would have been very young. Well, not that young, I suppose. It would be, I have no idea, 13, 12. I don't know. But, you know, certainly a kid that had no reference points for, you know, love beyond, you know, just being a kid in a family. So what is that? Because when I hear it now, I feel the same thing.
Yeah,
It's that whole thing that goes through your body and comes up in your chest and yes, the back of your neck and all that. And you feel that chill. What is that? What is that?
yeah.
You know,
It's
it's like a,
special, whatever it is, but I don't know what it's called.
yeah, it's a physical response to something so like, you know, it's like an animal thing. It's an emotion. It doesn't, you can attribute it to lots of things, you know, being in love, whatever. But like, if it affects a little boy who has had no like reference points, has never been in love, is not even like dating anybody, what was my reference points? But I swear I felt that same physical prickling of my whole body.
Yeah,
You know, and you're like, oh, you know, that chill is just, and at 61, I feel the same thing, you know. Like, what? That's magic to me. It's beyond words, it's beyond the melody. It's just, what is that? That something you hear
yeah.
can take you to that place. It's magic,
It
absolute magic.
is absolute
It's
magic.
wild.
I'm
It
going to
will be
ask you to
on
tell
mind
me,
till the day I drop.
if you could tell me, please, Mike, the song that reminds you of your time at school, please.
Well, you know, when I was probably 14 and I had a friend and he was like, we should learn to play guitar and play rock and roll. And it's like, yeah, but we don't have a guitar. And how are we going to do this? And in my school, there were these older kids who were 17 or whatever in their last year. And they were in the school's only, and I think first punk rock band. And they were called the Spirals because obviously they were totally a Buzzcocks tribute band, you know? And
And this was in Manchester at the time.
this was actually near in, you know, my family were all Australian, but they emigrated to the UK in the 70s.
Mm.
And I went to, I think it was near Reading, it was in the south of England. This was.
Okay.
It was a school there, and these guys were in this band called the Spirals, and they were the only band in the school, and they had these electric guitars. They were like, you know, Chinese, not Chinese, you know, they were like cheap, beautiful, cruddy electric guitars that they had. And these older guys, you know, because we were just 13 or 14, were sweet and cool enough to lend us their guitars every once a night. One, you know, just every now and again to go and try and learn how to play. And and it was those guys in that band, the Spirals, that first played me the riff to boredom, you know, which is that great, like you feel like I don't know who wrote Boredom, but it has that air, that punk era of like play a riff on the bass, and then the guitar player plays it in bar chords. You know, it's all this sort of stuff, and it's so good. And so whenever I remember playing this song Boredom to my two of my kids were in a band together called Mud Club, and when they started out, the youngest of them was 9, and they were just learning music together. And I was like, you need to hear the Buzzcocks, and I need to play you the song Boredom because my daughter was teaching herself bass guitar, and it's like you
Yeah.
got to learn it. And they did, and they became Buzzcocks fans. And it was like my association with this teenage punk rock band that helped inspire me when I was 13 and lent me their guitars and played Boredom. And then passing it on to my kids to be like, no, honestly, Buzzcocks, greatest songs ever. And listen to this one. And then they played it. And so it's this weird, for me, like real key song that takes
Yeah.
me right back to being 13 and borrowing a guitar from these nice older teenage kids that were like being mentors. Like, you need to listen to Buzzcocks. You need to play this. Let me play you this, show you this riff, you know. And and then, you know, 40 years later, carrying that on and showing my kids the same song
That's
and then
wonderful.
inspired by it. So who knows? I'm sure when Bud Scott wrote that song, they weren't thinking that, it would have all this profound effect
I,
for all
I,
sorts of people.
I want to ask you, you mentioned like hearing your siblings' records and artists like
Yeah.
Hendrix and stuff like that. When you all of a sudden hear Spiral Scratch or, any of those early Buzzcocks records, as a young lad, picking up a guitar for the first time, did hearing bands like, because if you look at Jimi Hendrix looked like he'd landed from another planet and he sounded like it was from another planet. And all of a sudden, you've got the Buzzcocks that look like the guys up the road that are
Yeah.
making this raucous like music. Like, did it make you feel like, oh, I could do this?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, going back to what I was saying about bands like the June Brides, it was
Mm,
that feeling of like, you know, um, just a way in, like, oh, it's not like just you don't need to be a genius, you don't need to be somebody clever or special to do this. You just have to want to do it, and then you got to weigh in,
yeah,
and that really is a big thing for me. Like I became a professional musician, like that's what I've done for 30 years. I've raised my four kids just as a working musician, and I became a good player and a good arranger and all those sort of skill sets, because I love music and I've spent a lot of time learning it, and so I became a musician. But I always have this thing of like, I got into this because I believe it's fundamentally it it's the most beautiful, simple, raw form that anybody can write the best song anybody can write. And it may be the only song they ever write. It doesn't matter. It's such a simple form that somebody could show up with no skills. Like, I've been working hard at this all my life, and I've got a lot of skills now. But I also know that somebody could show up my door who's just picked up the guitar 3 weeks ago, and they might sit down and play a song that's better than any other do. And I find that lovely and inspiring. This accessibility, this like,
yeah,
just bloody, just, you got something to say, you
yeah.
want to say it, you can do it. You can find a way, and actually, I even like, a bit of a fan of, bands like Humanly, big pop bands that use early sort of computery, but keyboard-based music for the same thing of like, oh look, we don't have to play. We can just have an idea and you know play it on this little keyboard, and it's not very difficult to do. And then we can make these beautiful songs. We don't need this
Absolutely.
huge. We don't have to be Hendrix. We don't have to be, great musicians.
Yeah, I think that, that early electronic scene that was, whether it be in Sheffield
Yeah.
or where I am right now in Basildon in Essex, like that was as punk as whatever
Yes.
happened in '77 or whatever.
Absolutely. I really believe that. And it really struck me the same way. Even like early Depeche Mode. So I'm a big fan of Vince Clarke as a songwriter. He's a
He's
great,
he's he's our
amazing.
hometown hero, mate. He's our hometown hero.
Yeah, I
Like
love Vince Clarke. I remember going to see when he was doing Erasure still. And boy, they were doing it was a tour where they'd they were big enough that they could do stadiums, and they had this lovely humility of being like, we're not a stadium band. That's silly. That's silly. Yes, we can fill the stadium, but we're just like two blokes, and only one of us sings and talks.
Yeah.
And what's that? That's not a stadium show. So they
Yeah.
just booked theaters and did like 3 nights in each theater. And I went to one of those and I just loved it. I
Yeah.
just loved it. Was so, there was no pomp to it.
Yeah.
There was no pretense. It was so just like these are just songs, and we're just a couple of blokes up here, just like you, just singing the songs you like that
Yeah.
we made. And it's I loved it. It was pure and lovely, and as you say, relates strongly to some of the things in punk music. That just that accessibility, just that like, no, we're not gods.
Yeah.
We're not making the art is transcendental. The art is like huge and beautiful.
Yeah.
But we're not huge and beautiful. We're just people. The
Yeah.
art's big. We're
Yeah.
not big. It's that's the difference to me. It's like the art is big. When you
Yeah.
start thinking the people are big, that's a nonsense. It's
Yeah.
always been. It's even with, extraordinary people that do extraordinary stuff. They're still just people,
Yeah.
you know?
We're all flesh and
And
blood.
and
Yeah.
and and so yes, definitely that early electronic stuff. I mean, it's been in a thread all the way through. It goes on now, just
Mm.
people being like, "Yeah, I'm really not great, but look at this. I made
Yeah.
this. It's
Yeah.
pretty good, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
pretty."
Yeah.
You're like, you know,
Absolutely. Any day of the week, give me some young kid that has just picked up an instrument and has made something interesting rather than some long established, incredible session musician that can play the most complicated guitar solos. And I'd rather have something exciting and
no,
fresh.
exactly. Yeah. I say this as someone who's like, I am a session musician and stuff.
Mm.
I do this stuff before, but still, even when I work that in that world, I'm like, you know, most of the job to do is just at the service of the song. It's
Yeah.
not show, doing anything clever. It's just listening to the music and going like, what can I do to help present this
Yeah.
in an even more effective way? That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no tricks. It's
Yeah.
just like responsiveness, and it's like but I'm can play stuff, and I'm pretty, but I'm also now like, yeah, but sometimes what's needed, it's it's nothing complex,
Yeah.
but it is sensitive. It's
Yeah.
really sensitive, and so essentially somebody else could play it that maybe has less skill sets than I am, but has the nuance and the feel, and they'll do a better job than I will, you know.
That's so
That's
interesting. That's really interesting. And
And I love that. I love that whole process of being like, sometimes in the studio, like you want the piano part, you're like, okay, so Sandra, you're the really good piano player. But the way Kelly plays it, she doesn't even play piano. That's got the right, because it suddenly has that sort of awkward Velvet Underground moment. That's what the track is calling for here. So we, you
yeah.
let Kelly play the piano, even though Kelly doesn't play the piano, just because when she plays it, it'll have that weird, lovely, trying hard to do something simple vibe,
Yeah.
which is sometimes so beautiful and affecting, you know?
Love that. I love that. Um, I'm going to ask you now to tell me the first song you remember buying from a record store, please.
Right. And I have to be honest, is that I can't remember, so I had to remember what were my early records. And
Okay.
I remember buying Smash Hits on the recommendation of my oldest brother, who is 10 years older than me. I'm 61, so he's 71. So he saw Hendrix play live 3 times because he's, solidly a baby boomer, where I'm
Yeah.
sort of at the end of that generation. So I missed out on all that. But he was there for all that. And I remember being probably 6 years old. My big brother was a 16-year-old guy and he played organ in like a, 1960s, in the basement rock band, and on the in my brother's bedroom, on the back of his door was a poster of Jimi Hendrix. I remember I was 6 years old my big brother pointing to that poster and saying, "You see that? That's Jimi Hendrix. That is God." And then when I was like 13, 14 and trying to learn to play guitar, again, the same big brother was like, if you want to play guitar, you need to listen to old R&B records. You listen to the guitar players that play on Motown records and stuff. The stuff, not the big solo guys, because all those guys learned from these old R&B acts who just played on all those, it's a job, you show up there. But they developed all these beautiful things, if you pay attention to those guitars. So it was like you need to listen to old R&B soul guitar players, soul. And he was like, now Jimi Hendrix, you need to listen to Jimi Hendrix. But Jimi Hendrix started out in R&B and soul. That's what he did. And then he, laid the groundwork for what is now the big rock god guitar thing.
Mm.
So he said, go listen to R&B and then listen to early Jimi Hendrix. And he said, get smash hits. Store, and I bought smash hits. And I listened to it sort of religiously and attentively because my big brother had said, you need to study this. And I seem to remember, at least the version I had of it, had that great thing where uh, the drums and bass were panned to one side and the electric guitar and the voice were panned to the other. So you could actually cut out the whole band and just pay attention to Jimi Hendrix
Yeah,
guitar playing, turning the pan pot, and you just only hear the guitar part. It's kind of helpful when you're
fantastic.
trying to learn it. But and the song, the thing with smash hits is actually full of those lovely, succinct little pop songs. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
it's not the
absolutely.
big, massive, overblown. It's these little nuggety. He's a pop
Yeah,
writer. Jimi Hendrix has again another humble sort of character who
yeah,
just wanted to write good songs.
yeah,
And got put in a position of being like, oh, he's like, I just want to. I wish I could write like Dylan. I wish I could, write poet. He was like
yeah,
a humble, beautiful person that was trying to write pop songs as well as, everything else.
yeah,
And Smash Hits is full of those little nuggety ones, all
absolutely,
the Hey Joe
absolutely.
and yeah, I don't know. It was a record I studied.
I'm going to ask you for track five, Mike, to tell me the song that soundtrack your years going out clubbing.
So yeah, because I'm old enough that like people say clubbing, I presume it's going to be like electronic music, which sort of came to the fore really in my sort of last few years in Manchester. So my experience of clubbing was like the stuff that really influenced me was like the places that played rock and roll, indie nightclubs. So instead of it being a big electronic dance thing, it was pre that. And and I picked the Violent Femmes because those records are just they always sounded so damn good in the clubs. They were so direct and so like, man, they they were beautifully played and just they would come out and you bet like, down, 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 and you just hit the floor because there's just no way you
Yeah,
couldn't. It's just it totally they hit a nerve of something. You just hit that part and you'd be like, we got to dance now. And I also remember Dan Benchy because seeing them because they used to play in Manchester, I think the international one, and they were one of those bands that would just consistently just be like, just like the record, but in a good way.
yeah,
They just would get up and play and be like, "Holy cow, this is like what I've been listening to."
yeah,
Feel like energetic, but they were so like robust. They knew what they did.
yeah,
They just did it really consistently, but not like in that sounds bad. That sounds like, oh, it's lacking. And you're like, no, no, they're just like would play these really
Yeah,
tight, beautifully written and arranged parts, and they play them really well, with lots of sauce, and you'd be like, "Oh my gosh, I love this as much or more as than the record," you know?
fantastic. I'm going to ask you now to tell me a favorite song from an artist from your home county, please.
So, when I read this as home country.
Mike, I've got to level with you. This is episode 689, and I reckon about 680 people have said exactly what you've said when I've asked them. So you're not alone there, mate.
We'll go for it, but we'll say that. So, I was born in Australia, but I never lived there, right? So, I was always my family migrated around, and then I continued migrating, and eventually, in my late 20s, I immigrated to America, and weirdly, I ended up in the city of New Orleans, and for whatever reason, I couldn't explain why. It was the first place I'd ever lived that I felt like I was home. This is a strange thing. Maybe because it's just a port city and it's full of this, people from everywhere. I don't know what it is, but it was the first place I felt like, wow, I kind of belong here. And so I picked a song from New Orleans. Um, and if you want a county, it's New Orleans Parish because Southern Louisiana is Catholic and they use parishes, not counties. So instead of counties, you have parishes. So Orleans Parish, and the artist is probably my favorite singer of all time. A person that I always wish I'd written a song good enough for her to sing. And that's Irma Thomas, who's like soul queen of New Orleans. And another one of those people, like you'd see Irma Thomas at the grocery store. I mean, she had hits in the 60s and
Yeah,
the 50s. And, she's a figure. And she's a grandma, and she'd just be at the grocery, just
wow.
a real person. And I saw her play twice. And, she's an older, well, she wasn't that old actually. But she still had this voice. And more than that, I remember just seeing her. And that thing where I'm sure you've had it, where you're watching a band and somehow they just communicate their love of music to you in such a way that you feel yourself brimming with tears
Yeah,
of joy. You have that like elation of a shared thing. They bring you up, you know?
absolutely.
They're not just putting on a show, they're connecting with you, and together you're both sort of transcending, whatever your life is, and you're feeling that big joy. And I remember feeling this at a show she played. It was Jazz Fest, it was like a festival. And she got out there and the city's own grandmother and sung her hits with this big old smile on her face that wasn't fake. It was just like, I'm playing my hometown and there's a bunch of tourists here and they don't know who I am and it doesn't matter. And a bunch of you do know me. And I'm just going to sing these songs and I'm so glad to be here. And it was so elating. And she still had this voice that Irma Thomas, she's soul singer, but she just sings the song. She just
Yeah,
sings the melody. There's no show. You know
yeah,
what I mean? And as a songwriter, I was like, gosh, what a thing to have Irma Thomas sing your song. Because you know that when Irma sung it, she would just sing the tune that you'd written, and
yeah.
do it. And Irma Thomas does that. She just, there's the song. It's a great song. I'm going to sing it. It's not a
Beautiful.
vehicle for for me to show off on. It's just a good song, and I'm going to sing it for you. You know?
Yeah,
Ruler of My Heart is it's a beautifully written song. It's a great recording. Alan Toussaint is a hero of mine. I became a record producer and it's independent one, it's small level guy. But Alan Toussaint is one of my heroes because well, he's a great arranger, great producer. worked amazing musician, worked all those years, making all those records out of New Orleans, his hometown, you know, and again, somebody you could just meet. It's not like remote LA God
Yeah.
stuff. These are regular people who've made extraordinary art for decades,
Yeah.
decades and decades and decades and decades, never stopped. I saw Alan Toussaint on tour a year or two before he died. He was just doing a tour of just him solo at a piano, just playing songs that he'd written, but also music that inspired him. He was like, just it was a beautiful show. My neighbor in Kansas, when I was living in Kansas, it was a theater show, big theater. And he was playing, this beautiful rock and roll thing. And he just in the middle of the song invited any member of the audience to come in and sit at the piano with him from the theater.
No
And my
way.
neighbor, and my neighbor Harry, who's actually just died this week ago, Harry Miller. He was my neighbor in Kansas. And we pushed him because he's a great piano player. And Harry Miller walked all the way down from the balcony and joined Alan Toussaint on stage playing the right hand solo part on the piano.
Oh, wow.
And he kicked it. But then, that's that thing, there's a performer who again had no, I'm just a musician. There's lots of musicians, probably a lot of musicians in the audience. Does anybody want to join me here? You know,
Love
that
it.
openness, that knowing that this is a fundamentally soulful and simple pursuit. No matter how
Yeah.
good we get at heart, this is something we all share, you know?
Yeah. Totally.
Talking, yeah. But anyway, so Ruler of My Heart, Irma Thomas. I think Alan Toussaint might have written the song. I can't remember. But kind of two heroes of mine.
Love it. It's your last track, and I'm going to ask you now to tell the listeners of this show a song that you think they may not know that you would like them to hear.
Well, I want them to hear my kids who the Mud Club. It's Mud with two D's, like the old club in New York in the
Hmm.
70s, the old punk rock club, the Mud Club. Well, two of my children, Sadie and Julian, uh, my eldest daughter, she grew up with parents who were touring musicians. And until she was 13, she swore she was going to go to college and get a real job and not make the same mistake as her parents. But, both the parents, myself and my ex-wife, we were touring musicians for the whole time our kids were growing up. It's a rough life because we were like mid-level, low-level, working blue collar musicians. Nothing glamorous about it. Rough with four kids, touring all the time. And so she grew up with that and she was like, I'm gonna like be a lawyer or a doctor or anything but a musician. And then she turned 14 and I don't know what happened, but she went up to the attic and started teaching herself bass guitar and electric guitar. And neither her mother nor I knew what was going on. And then her little brother, who was 9 years old at the time, joined her on drums. And then I just listened to these two kids, and I didn't teach them a lick. Go up and teach each other rock and roll. And so the Mud Club is a band. My daughter is now 24. My son is 18. They've been in this band for nearly a decade since they were little kids. They're on their like fourth album, I think, the third or fourth album. And they play rock and roll with that energy and sincerity and teeth and lack of affectation and real, like, I don't know. She's my eldest daughter, but I got to tell you, she plays electric guitar like she means it. And it's beautiful. And, uh, and I just feel like, it's good old school garage rock and roll. And I wish that everybody could hear them. And yes, they're my kids, and I'm proud of them. But it's just soulful and it's real. And you got to imagine these two 9-year-old boy and his sister hammering out rock and roll. And here they are as adults, and they're still together doing it. It's special.
That really
And
is. That's
better songs
fantastic.
than ever. That's the thing. I mean, they're on their journey, whatever that is. So the last song I want everybody to hear is I think it's a single they put out, I think just this year. But they've got lots of stuff out there, and they're great.
Well, we'll make it nice and easy for people to go and discover and listen to Mud Club as well as all the other tracks that we've spoken about today because we'll put together a playlist for people that want to go and listen. We'll make it nice and easy. We'll put the playlist together and we'll put the link in the show notes so people can go and listen to everything that we've spoken about today. One thing that we haven't spoken about too much, we've been getting overexcited about everybody else's music. We haven't spoke about yours. You put the band back together.
Yeah, well, it was I didn't put the band back together. It was really, it was this thing I would never have thought would happen. I don't think any of us did. And it just sort of snuck up on us. Basically, I gotta say, actually, uh, the Mud Club discovered the band that their dad had been in as a kid because they didn't grow up with any of that. I didn't have any Man from Delmonte records or any stuff. I haven't had any of that stuff. And then somehow they discovered one or two songs that were online, and they were like, "Wait a minute, you were in like an indie band?" And they were like, they, and they began poking around and they began trying to find the records because I didn't have any of the records. And they were like, "What is this?" And they kind of liked it. And they were like, "We like this. It's like whimsical and like kind of fun." And on their search for stuff, I believe they found a very tiny undersubscribed fan page somebody had kindly set up. And through that, a guy called Ian Lee was kind enough my son was looking for any records and he had a records and he sent my son my record. and and then they started a rapport between Ian Lee and my kids.
Ian
And then
Ian Ian Lee's a fascinating individual, isn't he?
exactly.
He's a former guest of this show as well, and he's got a very big obsession with the monkeys, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. Well, and so, Ian started asking each member of the band separately whether they would be open to, and each one was like, yeah, I'd probably do it, but like Mike won't do it. And so he coordinated, so he'd spoken to every member of the band, and they'd all been like, yeah, I guess I'd be up for it, but Mike won't do it. And then he came to me and was like, well, everybody else says they'll do it. Do you think they'll do it? And then I knew it would kind of make my kids smile if I said yes, because they'd sort of lit some of this fire with their mischievousness. And so I was like, oh, what? We're all old enough and it's whimsical enough, you know, that there's no pretense of, any kind of ambition. This is just some old friends. I stayed in touch with Sheila, the bass player of the band, all these years. But Martin and Howard I hadn't seen for 35 years at all. And just the idea of like, what, we're all gonna come back together and play songs that like I wrote when I was 22.
Yeah.
That's weird. Let's do it, you know. And it was very, very sweet. And and they're hilarious because you get back with people you haven't seen since you were very young, and it's like everybody behaves the same.
Yeah.
It's just like I thought I'd changed so much, a lot of things I did as a younger person I'm not very proud of. You think like, well, I'm a better person than I was. I've grown up a lot. And then you rejoin the band you were in when you were 22, and you're like, oh my gosh, we're all exactly the same. We're just the same. We haven't changed at all. It's an illusion. That whole thing of growth doesn't really happen.
Fantastic, fantastic.
But
So,
very, very lovely. And then, we found it a joyful thing to be playing together. Very sweet thing. A lot of love in it. Touched and flattered that there's some people that want to see it. That was unexpected. I mean, we booked a show. Ian said, would we do a show? I'm like, okay. And then he books a venue that I'm like, that is nobody's. I mean, if you want to book it, sure, but who's going to come and see us? It doesn't matter. We'll play. It doesn't matter. And then I did not expect it, you know, to sell out in the 20 minutes it took to sell out. That was totally like, oh, what? And touching and nice. And then just to play with everybody and the people that come to the shows, they're all the high school kids. They're all high school kids, except now they're 50.
yeah,
They were 17 and now they're in their 50s. And so it's a
fantastic.
lovely crowd because they're beautiful, interesting people, all grown ups who've had lives. And we've had a 35, 37-year hiatus. And so it's like, yeah. And yeah, and we just got together and made a record together. We never got to make a studio album. There was never a budget for that. We were always on really beautiful and broke independent labels who did the best for us, but there was only money for a day, one day in the studio, maybe a day and a half, two. So it was never a studio album. We made a live album and some compilation, like singles compilations. So 37 years later, I was like, well, I run a recording studio, so we got free studio time. So if you want to come in for a week and we'll just make a record. And we also made it in the way that we never got to make records in the old days, and that we literally I just set up everybody and we just played the songs and sang them.
Yeah,
No, overdubs. We just did it proper 1960s style, to set everybody up and everybody just played. And the record is, you know, about us playing together. Back in the day, we always had to do things in pieces. They never let me just sing the song and keep the vocal. You had to sing the song, and then they made you sing the song again, but this
yeah,
time, so that was really a lovely thing to finally be able to do that with the band and actually make a record that felt like, wow, that really is just us as we are, such as it is. You know, that's us.
that's
Whatever.
fantastic. That's fantastic. Um, Mike, thanks so much for coming on and talking
Um,
records with me. And that was a beautiful place to wind up the conversation, to hear that, it had come back, and it come back in such a positive way, and you've recorded it in such a raw and real way. And yeah, and those connections and those that hadn't changed. You were still essentially the same people, for good or bad. But uh, but yeah, it's been lovely to have you share that with me, and I feel really really privileged that you've given up your time to do that today, mate. And
thank you, man.
I wish you all the best with the new record, and hopefully there'll be more shows, and I will endeavour to be at one of those.
Yeah, I think it's the Ritz in December, right? December 23rd, I think. At the Ritz.
Fantastic, fantastic. Mike, thank you so much. I'm going to press stop, but
Thank
don't
you.
go anywhere.
All right.